One of the really vilest things that has come out of this Heritage Foundation shit, and why that organization needs to be dissolved, is its stance on so-called no-fault divorce. And again, this outfit is currently run by people who were not alive back before 1969, or were too young to remember what it was like before 1969 and no-fault divorce. The first no-fault divorce law was passed in California. It was a farce. Fault-based divorce was basically a farce. It was a farce in that you had to show who the guilty party, who was the guilty party, who was the innocent and hurt party. It was adversarial. And you had to, prove that they were violent or prove that they were cheating. And one of the funny things about this era was there were times, more than a few times, when couples who didn't want to be married anymore, but because of the adversarial nature of the fault system, would stage adultery, like in hotel rooms or something like that, in order to facilitate this. It was totally a corrupt disaster. And of course, remember, the Heritage Foundation loves the 1950s. They think it was just such a golden era. Of course, they never lived through it. These assholes never even lived through it, for the most part. But they think people get divorced frivolously or whatever. But what they're really in favor of is domestic violence. That's really what they're in favor of, because one of the biggest reforms to preventing continued domestic violence and to help women and children escape domestic violence situations was to allow them to leave and file for unilateral divorce. What in the fuck is the matter with the Heritage Foundation? Well, a lot of it is, and I'm not anti-Catholic, but a lot of these people are Catholics of the really weird stripe that think divorce is you can't dissolve it. It's, I don't know, indissoluble or whatever the fucking word it is. But that's a religious thing. And marriage has always been a civil thing, no matter how much Christianity and other religions try to co-opt it. It's always been a civil notion. It's always been a legal notion. Oh, and in this article I'm going to link to here in a minute, the courts, the U.S. Supreme Court, back in the 1880s, I think it was, said that marriage was not a contract, but it was an institution. It was a concept and an institution. It was not a contract. And so these people at the Heritage Foundation, they believe in this slur called the broken home. I remember growing up hearing about these homes were broken because there was a divorce in the picture. That wasn't a broken home. The home was broken long before there was ever a divorce. And you cannot compel people to stay together if they don't want to stay together. And it damages kids beyond anything to keep fighting parents together. But these assholes want to restrict it, particularly for parents with children under 18. Well, whoop-de-doo. That's overblown. Again, it's overblown. Parents who hate each other's guts, parents that have substance abuse issues or financial issues or adultery or all these other damn things, or they just outgrew each other. That has a negative impact on kids, not the fact they decide to split up. That's been debunked. And this is all religious shit. saving the America by saving the family. Over the course of 60 years, casual sex, abortion, childlessness, no children by choice, and no-fault divorce became normalized. And while marriage and the natural family, and of course it's a bunch of crap. Let's see what else is crap. This bullshit crap. And the natural family became stigmatized. In what planet? I hear brainwashing about marriage and the nuclear family all the time. I've heard it my whole goddamn life. And people aren't being stopped to get married and having kids. It's the idea that it's expected, that you have to do it right out of high school or at the very latest by age 25 and start having babies. And then you're expected to stay together for 50 or 60 goddamn years and expected to be happy. Not very many of those early marriages worked out. It's the biggest predictor for marital strife, for divorce, is age. But these jackasses are just, and of course it's a report, and I'm not going to read it because they're full of shit. The only way for America to thrive in the future is to rebuild the family, which could only happen with the societal commitment to revive the institution of marriage. Marriage is dying out, and they know it. It ain't ever going back. It's gradually dying out. And people having choices how to live their lives, what in the fuck is wrong with that? Really, what in the fuck is wrong with that? But these are religious whack jobs that are on this Heritage Foundation. And there's a lot of recommendations. I'm not going to go through these details, but it is a lie about no-fault divorce. Well, they're liars anyway. That's what they're paid to do. And about 8 years ago, and there are numerous studies about the effects of no-fault divorce. One of them, way back in the 80s, was that Divorce Revolution. God, who the hell wrote that book? But why don't I just say it? And I got it when it came out. God, I can't even do this. V-O-R-C-E. I'm not Tammy Wynette. Revolution. Lenore Weitzman, yeah. And that book got criticized a lot because it was 1985. And she looked at the impact of divorce laws pioneered in California, arguing they led to increased economic hardship for women and children, despite reducing legal acrimony. Well, things have changed a lot in 40 years. And there was a lot of people that objected to the inference here. It was fault divorce was shit. It was absolute shit. And it's a hell of a lot better to have a decreased standard of living in a divorce situation than to wind up dead or your family annihilated because an asshole refuses to let you leave, or you can't get away from them because they're threatening to kill you. So that book was a big deal back then. But that was 41 years ago. But there have been studies since and that have said, even though can be economic hardships, divorce is not the negative that these idiots on the Heritage Foundation seem to think. And just because somebody has been married 40, 50, 60, 70 years, that doesn't translate that it was a happy marriage. It's because there was stigma against divorce and the parents hated each other. I had parents who were like that. They were married 66 years before my dad kicked off. And they hated each other. And there were lots of reasons, lots of things I won't go into. And I found that rather than it being an anomaly, it was pretty damn common. But the stigma was too much to get a divorce. And actually, my dad's dad did get divorced, and he was abusive. Not actually his dad, but his parents got a divorce when he was growing up. But his dad was an abuser. But somehow, my parents never, well, they stayed together for the kids. You do it for the kids. And then we had to listen to this bullshit every damn night for years. Arguing. What in the hell? And they weren't unique. But, you know, the Heritage Foundation, hey, that doesn't matter. Stay together no matter what for the kids, at least until they're 18. But, no, actually, this was a study here from, and one of many, in 2018 from Southern Methodist University, and they were criticizing Texas legislature bill, which aimed to eliminate no-fault divorce for individuals seeking a divorce without the consent of both parties. And they point out in great detail that it literally saves lives. That typically the woman can file a unilateral divorce, get on with her life, and typically if there's kids if she's got custody. It's self-preservation. It can't be a mutual thing. It's not that way. And anybody who is against no-fault divorce supports domestic violence. I don't care. I don't care what your bullshit argument is about commitment and taking a vow and all that other crap. You want to save families, you support no-fault divorce and unilateral no-fault divorce. You make damn sure if you care about it. But this article goes into a lot of detail. And here's a little blurb, a quote here. The fault-based system and defenses led to incongruous results, where couples who were agreeable with each other would be granted a divorce by working together to fabricate grounds, one playing guilty and the other playing innocent, while acrimonious couples that could not cooperate in such a charade were forced by court to stay legally married. What a goddamn fucked up system that was. In the mid-1900s, so this is by the mid-1900s, the 1950s, and I'm just using these red areas rather than to go into huge detail, because I'll link this article. By the mid-1900s, it was clear to everybody that the system of divorce was fake, a solemn, if silly, comic melodrama beneath the dignity of the American court, a system that cheapens not only the tribunal, but the members of the legal profession who are involved. Yeah, it was a total farce. During this time, social scientists and psychologists were also coming to new understandings about relationships and marriage. Interpersonal romantic relationships were intricate and dynamic, and when they ended, it was completely inaccurate to simply point to blame at one partner. Yeah, that was the basic problem with fault divorce. It was damages. However, most were unsure of exactly what to do about the situation. How could the law accommodate the needs of those who wanted a simple and less expensive means to end their marriage, while still protecting their individual legal rights, and those that wanted to reinforce the sanctity of marriage and protect the ideal image? Well, it's an ideal image of the family. In response to these growing concerns, legislators in California began looking to reform their state's divorce laws. They embraced the philosophy of the report of the Governor's Commission on the Family. This was Ronald Reagan, who was himself divorced, as we all know, which found that a new law was in order, one that would allow the therapeutic process of the family court to function with full effectiveness and require the court to inquire into the whole picture of the marriage. Therefore, legislators studied and developed this new law with an eye toward reducing some of the absurdities that had begun to pervade the existing system of fault-based divorce. The proposed replacement was therapeutic divorce, in which a judge would have authority to deal with the entire human drama that lay behind a bill of divorce, and that skilled professionals should be attached to the court to help him. Accordingly, with a plan that was designed to foster reconciliation rather than to ascertain culpability, California passed the first no-fault divorce law in 1970. Politicians and judges in California were certain that the new type of divorce would save close to 90% of divorces in that state. And in fact, each stage of no-fault divorce litigation was deigned to convert the divorce action into a conciliation procedure. The very process of stalling divorce-minded partners was an integral component of therapeutic divorce, premised on its belief that slowing the divorce process would dissuade many couples from seeking to dissolve their marriages. And then, and then they talk more about that. But anyhow, more and more states, in the red print says, began to see the advantages of no-fault divorce and began overhauling their fault-based systems. By 1985, every state had some form of no-fault divorce on its books. So it was a lifesaver, and that's what they conclude. Fault-based divorce, they can't conclude, like high-conflict marriage, is hard on children. So it's not no-fault divorce. It's fault-based divorce, like shitty damn marriages. That's what's the problem. But this article focused on Texas. And here they wrote, this is 2018. And I don't know if this is a national statistic, because I'm not going to deep dive into this. Half of all divorcing couples no longer need to even hire an attorney to complete their divorce. And even in more complex divorce cases, they may only consult with an attorney once or twice while working out most of the details themselves. So it's a lot better system, a lot more efficient. Yeah, that was another book, Judith Wallerstein. And she wrote The Unexpected Legacy of Divorce. And here it says, it was often cited in arguments against no-fault divorce. And that book came out about the same time as that other book I mentioned. She studied over 100 children for a period of 25 years during and after their parents' divorce. From those studies, she handpicked only 7 participants to write about in her book, and then used those ideal cases to make wildly unsupported generalizations about the long-term effects of divorce. Yeah, it was debunked. It was totally debunked. So anyway, yeah, the kids are better off in a 2-household situation than in a 1-household situation where the parents are arguing or there's domestic violence. And anyway, they go into a lot of detail about this thing. It's a great article. And it was this from I think this was from it was Southern Methodist University. And it says here, it concludes, a woman's choice to leave a marriage is just as personal, and usually it's the woman that initiates it, and private a decision as the choice to marry in the first instance, which has been identified by the court as fundamental. Similarly, if adopted, and this is about the Texas law, with its return to fault-based grounds, would place the undue burden on a woman's ability to escape from an abusive marriage. And it's a lifesaver. And that they're not outliers. A supporter of that law argued in defense this law that the issues with domestic violence would only come into play in what he termed exceptional cases, but it isn't exceptional, insinuating that this return to fault-based system would only place a burden on a few women, and that this imposition would therefore be outweighed by the state's interest to preserving marriage overall. Not the state's business to preserve it. Cases involving women in domestic abuse situations would be the outliers or the exceptions to the rule, so to speak. This is flatly belied by data on the prevalence of domestic violence in marriage. Moreover, as the Supreme Court recognized in Casey, even if the rule prevents only a few women from leaving a dangerous and potentially lethal marriage, the denial to those women could still constitute an unconstitutional and unacceptable burden. Yeah, so anyway, that was about the Texas law. But, you know, it goes into great detail. And it's, you support it, you support repealing no-fault divorce, you support domestic violence. You don't support families. You don't give a shit about kids. And again, Heritage Foundation, as always, is full of shit. And I mean, people are taking apart all their damn crap. That's a lot of content creators, a lot of writers, a lot of reporters. They're taking apart a lot of this shit that the Heritage Foundation is trying to put through. It's trying to sneak through, mainly, often through executive orders. But can you imagine the lawsuits? If any of this shit, the major shit ever became law, all of the damn lawsuits that would hit? But they're full of shit. And they want to, and it's all religious crap, which does not belong in the law. You have your religion, you don't believe in divorce, fine. Live life the way you do. But don't tell other people how the fuck to live their lives. So anyway, that is it for me.